Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Lee, and it's great to have everyone here. This is the second day of our NeuroAbilities series, brought to you by G3 ICT, the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, the National Center for Adaptive Neurotechnology, and the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. We welcome you here today. Today we'll be talking about unlocking the BCI and Neurotech market for persons with disabilities. As I mentioned, this is a 3-day symposium. This is day 2, so tomorrow we'll be back for day 3. There will be a survey that will go out at the very end of day 3, and so we hope to see you there. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to Mal. He's going to do some groundbreaking discussions around what to do today and what not to do, and some of the accessibility features that we're offering.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Malcolm Maestrel, and I'm a Membership Services Coordinator with the IAAP. Thank you for joining us for today's session of the NeuroAbilities Virtual Symposium, Unlocking the BCI and Neurotech Market for Persons with Disabilities. Today's theme is regulatory frameworks and alternative paths for direct-to-consumer technologies. Before we begin, we have a few general housekeeping items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. To enable closed captioning, select the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The stream text link will be posted in the chat as well. ASL translation is also provided. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. Please leave your questions in the Q&A. The chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues. And now I'd like to turn today's program over to our host conductor, Christopher Lee.
Thanks, Mal. I appreciate that. So again, my name is Christopher Lee. I am the Managing Director of IAAP, which is one of the partners for today's event, as well as I'm the VP and Chief Learning Officer for G3 ICT. And it is great to have you here today. We had an incredible day yesterday. The conversations, the discussions were phenomenal, and we'll have those links available, so you'll be able to watch that if you weren't able to attend yesterday's. Again, tomorrow we will have another one, and a survey will go after that. Next slide, please. I'm going to bring Teresa Vaughn on, who is a big part of the NeuroAbilities team, to talk a little bit about NeuroAbilities and to summarize a little bit of what happened yesterday. Teresa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you to our panelists and the team, and thank you to the audience for attending. We're very excited about this program. I am not Lydia Best. She is advertised as and well-deserved member of the Advisory Council, which I have the privilege to head right now for NeuroAbilities. I just want to summarize a little bit what happened yesterday, because we hope we can have a conversation that goes from the beginning of the story to the end of the story of the 3 days. We have yesterday, just to summarize quickly, we had the stage set by the director from WIPO, Alejandro Roca Campana, who set the stage for the neurotechnology and assistive technology, and talked about that the context of neurotechnologies developing in that environment for people with disabilities. And then we had a wonderful panel about the we had a wonderful panel that highlighted the role of people with disabilities in the development, that included John Kemp and Sandy Hambrink and Michael McKinley. They talked about the importance of including people with disabilities for the principles of efficacy and safety, and the advantages of having that participation. They also talked about the importance of remembering culture and nothing about us without us, and how the benefits of neurotechnologies on the might be better communicated to the and more realistically communicated to the entire community. And then we had a panel, a third panel, or a third group that that included Amy Cruz and Ana Marquez, two individuals involved in financing and developing neurotechnologies for the general market. And they were joined by Kathy Bodine, who is the director of the Center for Inclusive Design and Engineering at the University of Colorado. And they discussed how important it is to develop the mindset of team in the development of neurotechnologies, how gathering the cross-disciplinary the individuals in that can be involved in this, and how the moment is now, although people have to be ready for long-term investment. So we look forward to discovering the regulatory paths and also the paths to directly to market today from our discussants. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Teresa. This is Christopher again. Thank you for filling in for Lydia. You were excellent. Summarized excellent. So I want to bring to the stage our first speaker today, Dr. Florian Joshua. Hopefully I said that pretty good. Who's a co-founder and chairman of Blackrock Neurotech. He is also a professor and chair of the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering and director of the Center for Engineering Innovation at the University of Utah. Doctor, welcome to the stage. I'll let you introduce your panel and talk for just a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you. I wanted to keep things a little bit short. I have, a few slides, really mostly as sort of a background addition to help with some of that. I think we're all at a unique stage in this field. For me, this journey started almost 30 years ago, I would say. I was working with disabled children actually at that time. My mother was working in physical rehabilitation, and it bothered me at that stage already that we were really not providing any significant new tools that would help change people's lives. Now, I've been very, very fortunate in that I've been able to build a career around that. I'm an electrical engineer by training, focused on solid state devices and biomedical devices, and really started homing in on building implantable devices, in particular in the neural engineering field, to try and help restore function to those people that have lost it, be it due to injury, diseases, etc. And learned very quickly that, it really does take a village. I've been fortunate to be able to be part of a community that over the last decades, we're standing on the shoulders of giants before us that have pioneered certain paths, and then to be able to be a tool provider to the many different laboratories, clinical, translational efforts that have looked at how to help restore function. And so I'm seeing only one part of that, but everything starts and ends for both myself, the university team, the people that we work with, and of course the company, with the patient. Their needs, what actually makes their lives better. Then next in line, their families, the caretakers, the physicians that work with them, and and then after all, of course, the physiology, depending on what you're looking for, and in my case, one of the driving forces, and that is sort of a common thread with some of the speakers that we will hear today, is building interfaces to, for example, a brain that is still fully functional and intact, but that is no longer properly connected to the rest of your body, and then finding ways to reliably tap into those signals and allow somebody to control external devices or to receive sensory input. Now, many of us have worked in this field for many years. I think what has started changing, and I think I would go back over the last 10 years, there has been an increasing trend of first in humans, the frequency of first in human demonstrations of reaching major milestones in documenting that devices like, for example, a brain-computer interface as part of the overall puzzle for how to help those people can work. I remember when this first started, the community was very skeptical with some of the first work that the BrainGate team around, the Oprah, John Donahue and others, that this could even work. I remember when Mike Boninger, Jen Collinger, Rob Gaunt started at Pittsburgh, then following in their footsteps, and there were more and more teams building these types of efforts. There were concerns that it could last long, that you could put in multiple devices. From today's point of view, we're really now at an inflection point. There's more and more capital going into the market. It's finally been realized that there actually is a market, out of the more than 5 million people in the United States that live with paralysis. You sort of break it down and you maybe have somewhere in the 50 to 250,000 patients with complete tetraplegia. These are significant markets. There's an opportunity there, and we can really help and improve the quality of life. And so I consider myself very fortunate and lucky to be part of that generation where we see things taking off. There are more and more companies starting in this field, which is also encouraging. It's always and I'm in both roles. I'm on the academic side to help advance technologies, but I'm also an entrepreneur. As an engineer, the real litmus test is whether things really help people and whether they work. So it's not just your first paper that is out there, but can we reproduce it? Can we scale it? Can we manufacture it and then get it into a market to reach as many people as possible? And that means, for example, designing from the get-go to cost. It's often ignored in the academic setting. There we demonstrate what we can do, what mankind can accomplish if we put our mind behind it. But when it's a product, even though the cost for a tetraplegic, if somebody had an injury in their late 20s, early 30s, is somewhere in the $3.5, $4 to almost $6 million over a lifetime, that doesn't mean that you could or should price an implant that may help with that in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. My personal belief has always been that we want to make sure that this is reachable by everybody. So make sure it's in the range where maybe a pacemaker or a cochlear implant, etc., is, and make that available. A real eye-opener to me was a 2018 workshop that we organized at the Society for Neuroscience meeting. And I think, some of the people that are here remember that and have helped make that possible, where we proposed to not have some of us on stage, but have the pioneers, the study participants that had an implant on stage to document and talk about what works, what doesn't work, and what engineering and clinicians should be focusing on. And one of the really important takeaways for me, even after so many years of working with that one, is that a lot of them came back and said, there's so many things that are done on the research side that already work so well that they have real value for us. And we would like to see these products in the market now, not the typical promise of, in 5 or 10 years, which usually means never, or we don't know, it's somewhere out there. So I think we've made huge steps forward. We're now at a stage where the first devices will commercially enter the market, and that will provide massive opportunities for others as well. If you provide these things as a platform, and once you have a reliable interface, the sky's the limit. It becomes almost like an app store where then others can start building additional interfaces to help people get back into the workforce and do a lot of things. If you look at brain-computer interfaces today that are out there, I think the three main groups that we see is electrocortical grid-based implants that have shown great promise. There are some limitations in terms of data rate, but they've shown a function and value to subjects. A lot of people will be aware of synchrone stentrode-based implants, a very clever approach from a surgery approach point of view. They have their first, I think, 4 subjects now. I've had some for a little more than a year now. Of course, there's a conflict of interest here, obviously, the Utah array-based implants. And I think I need to update those numbers. We're now above 30 as well. They keep growing. And what is wonderful is that there's a whole host of other players that are entering the space, and they will get there, they will get into patients, and that will provide opportunity. So what does it mean for the community? That I think you're no longer ignored. You know, I always thought that I had to, in order to get there, build a medical device business, maybe in other areas that are much larger, generate a lot of revenue, and then have a trickle-down effect. I think the financial markets are there, the technological advances that we've made again over the last 10 years, and some of it is not silver bullets, it's systematic step-by-step identifying of failure modes, of problems, and addressing them. And doing it together and understanding it's not one professor or one lab that does it, but it's all of us as a community, the industrial players, the translational labs, the clinicians, the caretakers, to some extent in the next stage, the payers understanding the workflows in the clinic and at home. The pandemic has been a great challenge, but a great opportunity, because some labs have been able for the first time to have their study participants do their work at home and not in a lab setting, which is sort of a big step forward. So I'm eternally grateful that we're sort of in that situation where these things will come out there. I think we have an exciting next 10, 20, 30 years ahead of us. I'm very confident that in 10, 15 years from now, we will see high resolution chronic implant technologies become a key cornerstone of the portfolio of solutions that can be offered beyond the traditional ones, and you know, in a number of different neurological disorders. And so that having implants will become just as common as cardiac pacemakers are right now in cardiovascular, you know, situations. They started off as a last resort. Now they're almost a prophylactic that is being put in if you're a high risk patient. I think that we're going to see a similar approach here, or similar to what the Human Genome Project did in terms of diagnostics and therapies in many areas where, you know, government support funded it for quite a while. Then there came a few breakthroughs. Industry started jumping on it. Financial markets started investing. And today it's an integral part of our healthcare system. I think we're going to see the same thing here. And so I think it bodes well for patients with the first solutions coming out, them already being valuable. And we want to focus on those people that need it the most early on, and make it affordable and achievable, and then continue to work together over the next years and decades to reach more and more applications, less severe cases of tetraplegia. But eventually there's opportunities out there in other neurological disorders, all the way into behavioral and psychological diseases. And those of us that work in this field can help pioneer this. So I'm very much looking forward to the session. We have exciting speakers lined up that are the ones that on the front lines have enabled a lot of the progress, you know, that you've seen. And I'm just giving sort of an overview here, but people have documented controlling external devices, thought to text, sensory feedback. There's so many things that you can start giving back. And this is just a small looking through a keyhole, what we've been exposed to, but I'm very well aware of all the other efforts that are going on in there. So I only wanted to use a few minutes to make people aware of the fact we're at a critical time in this development, and we will see more and more of these efforts make it out there, so that what drove all of us to go into this field to help people is finally coming to fruition. At the same time, the academic and the science side will never stop, because it is actually an opportunity now with those tools becoming clinically available. I would venture to guess that we will make it a lot more achievable for more labs, for more people to work in this. We'll get more and more data. That is going to become a challenge, what to do with that robustly, and then to keep advancing the technology and to maybe make that even cheaper, so that you don't need a $10 million NIH grant to be able to work with patients or a large DARPA program. But because the device has now become part of the standard of care, it becomes cheaper, more easily achievable. The hurdles to be allowed to get an IDE to try something new out in a patient will hopefully become smaller. And so I'm very excited that the FDA, all the way back to the Innovation Pathway Program, then of course the breakthrough designations and the involvement that people like Heather and others that have really, it's been sort of going hand in hand, having the oversight, making sure things are safe, that ethically the right decisions are being made, but at the same time, seeing how important it is that these technologies make it out there and they're no longer just stuck in the research space. So thank you very much to everybody for joining. And again, I saw my role mostly sort of setting the stage. We see significant market opportunities and opportunities for more people to enter the space. And I welcome everybody to join. I think every new solution is going to be an opportunity for the patients, the people that we want to help. And I would like to say a big thank you to the many of you that have worked for us and with us in recent years, and look forward to many more years of collaborating. Thank you.
Thank you. Those comments were excellent. I do have a point though. I mean, this came up yesterday, and you talk about academia, you talk about industry, and the link between or the lack of link of getting a product to market. And yesterday, one of the panels that we had wasn't able to get to this place where they were going to kind of talk about language around that, having the right people in the right places, right? Because academics speak one way, industry speaks another way, and they don't always connect in the way that you're bringing a product. Do you have any thoughts around that because of your enrollment? Because this is really about getting costs down, right? And
absolutely. And part of it has to do with the incentives. I think there's a right and a need for all of it to be there. The fundamental science, and where some of the approach is cost is no object. I'm trying to replenish the well of knowledge and understand something, and that needs to exist. That is very important. I think it is very important, however, also to have a group, and NIH has helped with some of the funding mechanisms of people that do translational development, the way that a Draper in Europe or Fraunhofer and others, they're not the first ones to come up with the idea, but the ones that then look at it and said, great idea, now let's do it all over again, but let's consider what we know industry will need to be able to jump on that. Because industry has been burned quite often, when you pick things up from university, very often it's a proof of principle. And what is often underappreciated is the effort that goes into making processes scalable, translating. Oftentimes you spend 10, 100 times more than maybe a faculty member has spent in their lab to document something. And there's a lot of intellectual challenges and sometimes even fundamental challenges that come with that. And I think I've seen great steps in that direction. I want them to continue, that those areas respect each other, and that the resources are available from the government, from, that industry can't just go in and say, show me that it works in 10 patients and then I'll look at it. They need to get a little further into that again, into sort of the R side of the R&D equation. And academia has to understand that it is very important to have colleagues and an ecosystem and culture of people and labs that then connect with the fundamental science, and they mature technologies. Sometimes in the US that is done by startup companies and they raise venture capital, but the timelines are often long. I mean, look at it as an example at the Utah Array. Dick Norman invented the concept. It's been 25 years. And I would say it's taken 15 to almost 20 years to get to the point where you can finally promise, 10 years is actually not a concern. And then you even have the issue that sometimes that data exists in a separate space that is not quite known. So you then have an academic side that is incentivized by saying certain things don't work and there are problems with them, and therefore we're going to do something completely different. And I think that needs to exist. But at the same time, there needs to be some realism that, very often, as I said in my conversation, there are no silver bullets. There's a lot of systematic understanding these failure modes, and then appreciating that if you do something, but it costs you $5,000 to make an electrode, it won't fly. That is not a solution.
Yeah, good
so
point.
I think having the mechanisms, having the people investing there, I think we're on a good path. I think what is important is that both sides continue to develop a culture of respecting and understanding how they need each other, if they really mean what they're saying. And that means both industry can't just say, I'm not even going to look at it, you're meaningless unless you do A, B, and C. But you also can't have the academic who's saying, this problem was solved because they had a Science or Nature publication on it some time ago, and then they've moved on and said, no, I don't even think you can replicate that 100 or 1,000 times, so let's look at this together. And as long as that is understood, that it takes a village, I think we'll make great progress. So thank you for raising that.
No, thank you. Thank you for the insight there. I really appreciate it. It was a great presentation, and thank you for laying the stage for today's event. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. And then, I look forward to the presentations. And if anybody has questions, feel free to follow up after the fact. I'll gladly make time to offline follow up. There's amazing video footage of what patients can do these days with these type of things. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, put questions and answers in the Q&A if you've got questions, and we'll circle back around to them a little bit later. I next would like to bring up Jennifer. Jennifer, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Jennifer Collinger. Oh, excellent. It's nice to meet you. I haven't met you before. Jennifer is an associate. Yeah, thank you. Is an associate professor at the department in the Department of Physical, Medical, and Rehabilitation at the University of Pittsburgh. She has a second appointment. She stays very busy in the Department of Bioengineering engineering at the University of Pittsburgh, and the Department of Bioengineering at Mellon University. Wow, Jen, that's a lot. That was a mouthful. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. We're looking forward to you and your panel. Take it away. The stage is yours.
Well, thanks so much for inviting us to speak, and I'm really here just to introduce the stars of the show, our FDA representatives here. Most of my research is related to the development of implantable brain-computer interfaces. And so I've been fortunate enough to work with the FDA for more than 10 years now. And something that has really impressed me is just the amount that they are out and engaging with the community, through attending scientific conferences to keep up to date with what's going on in the field, but also participating in meetings like this to provide transparency in their process and resources for people who are entering this field. So really appreciate their participation. We have two speakers. First, Dr. Heather Dean. She currently leads the acute injury devices team as the assistant director in the Division of Neuromodulation and Physical Medicine Devices within the FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Speaking of a mouthful. So this division reviews devices ranging anywhere from wheelchairs and exoskeletons to brain-computer interfaces. And Heather has training in electrical engineering, her Ph.D. in neurobiology, having done primate electrophysiology and optogenetics. So very grateful to have you here today, Dr. Dean. Our second speaker is Dr. Julia Slocum, who is a lead reviewer at FDA in the same division. So again, her training is in biology with a PhD, where she did her research in the National Institute on Drug Abuse in Dr. Yeka Ponte's laboratory. And so her work had involved using emerging technologies, including optogenetics and 2-photon microscopy, to look at hypothalamic neuronal circuits during behavior. So with that, if you guys would like to share your slides, so you're already doing that, perfect.
Yes.
They'll be sharing with us about development of digital healthcare devices from an FDA perspective.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you, Florian, for setting the stage. I wanted to say I remember that 2018 Society for Neuroscience meeting and getting to hear from patients, and that really had an impact on me as well. You know, we do try to get out to meetings and talk to patients. So thank you very much for inviting us today to speak to you. As Jen said, my name is Heather Dean. I'm the Assistant Director in charge of the Acute Injury Devices team, and Dr. Julia Slocum is a lead reviewer on my team, and we'll talk to you about the regulation of brain-computer interface devices and digital healthcare devices in the neurospace, and our perspective about regulatory interactions that may pertain to your work and interests. So, many of you may be familiar with the mission of the agency and the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, or CDRH. As a center, we work hard to protect patients from harm, but we also work very hard to promote medical devices to make sure that patients have options for therapies and assistive devices that could potentially improve their quality of life. One core goal of the center is to improve patient access to safe and effective medical devices. So we really don't want to be a roadblock to those developing or testing new devices. We do, however, take very seriously our responsibility to protect patient safety. So we work to ensure that patients are as safe as possible when new devices are clinically tested and then marketed to patients. As many of you know, in recent years, we've seen growing interest in digital health technologies, and we believe that digital health technologies can be a valuable tool for consumers. We're excited to see stakeholders integrating digital health technology into medical devices to make use of recent advances in computing power, connectivity, sensors, and software. Our division at CDRH focuses on neurological devices, which includes reviewing a variety of physical medicine and rehabilitation medical devices, including brain-computer interface, or BCI devices, and software as a medical device, or SAMDs. This is why we're particularly excited to speak with you today, so that we can help you understand how to navigate the FDA for submissions for BCIs and SAMDs if you are developing or testing such devices. It's also helpful for those of you to know that who might be involved in some of these studies. We are seeing BCIs that use a wide variety of technologies to read neural activity, each with unique risks and potential benefits. We expect that device designs and technology will continue to diversify, and that we will begin to see SAMD submissions that use BCI data in the future. Submissions for BCI devices have grown exponentially in recent years, and we expect that they will continue to do so. However, we recognize that some stakeholders may be interested in developing software, which may or may not end up under the purview of FDA, depending on their intended use. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about our risk-based approach to the regulation of medical devices, health technology included. Those developing devices involving digital health technologies and medical software must first determine whether or not their product, one, is or is not a device, and if it is a device, two, whether it should be regulated as a medical device, which requires regulatory oversight, or as a general wellness device, which generally fall under our enforcement discretion. It's important to note that software functions could be critical to the intended use or a subset of the intended use of the product. In short, if software is limited only to a number of a specific array of functions, then it likely isn't considered a device, and the software would not be under the purview of the FDA. If you have questions about whether or not a product is a device, feel free to contact the Division of Industry and Consumer Education, or DICE, or email the device determination mailbox as shown here. However, if the software includes functions which qualify it as a device, the next step will be to determine whether the device qualifies as a general wellness or medical device. The FDA determines the regulatory pathway for devices based on risk, as I mentioned. General wellness devices are low-risk devices that make no medical claims and are limited to either one, an intended use that relates to maintaining or encouraging a general state of health or a healthy activity, Or two, an intended use that relates the role of a healthy lifestyle with helping to reduce the risk or impact of certain chronic diseases or conditions, and where it is well understood and accepted that healthy lifestyle choices may play an important role in health outcomes for the disease or condition. However, if a product has medical indications, then it is a medical device and therefore poses risk which may warrant FDA oversight. Naturally, increasing risk correlates with increased FDA oversight. The FDA evaluates risk to place each medical device into one of three classes for marketing, which define the level of regulatory control necessary to provide a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. I want to highlight the use of the term reasonable. It's a pretty important distinction to say that something is reasonably safe versus safe. For safety, there's a reasonable assurance that when you're using the device properly, the probable benefits from using the device outweigh the probable risks, and there is an absence of unreasonable risk. For effectiveness, there's a reasonable assurance that when there are clinically significant benefits in a significant portion of the target population. If a device maker is unsure about the appropriate classification for a device, they can submit a 513G request for designation to receive FDA guidance on which classification is suitable. However, we also have some oversight and interactions with device makers for devices that are still at the development phase. Now I'd like to pass it off to Julia to discuss how you might interact with the FDA during device development.
Thanks, Heather. We recommend that device developers communicate with the FDA early in their device development process. Here you can see a diagram of the typical product life cycle that we see. The diagram shows that there are many pathways to market depending on the risk level of the device, but here we focus on early interactions with the FDA and the clinical testing process. We recommend that device developers begin by discussing a device with us before requesting an investigational device exemption, or IDE, to collect human data to support a future marketing submission. No one is required to interact with the FDA prior to an IDE submission, but if the first conversation is at the IDE stage, those developing or testing devices may miss out on important information that can be critical to the design of studies and the success of future marketing applications. Use submissions include a number of different interactions, including informational meetings, pre-submissions, study risk determinations, and breakthrough device program interactions. Use submissions are free to submit and can help those developing or testing devices get to know the review team and potentially receive clarification about expectations for future submissions. We recognize that many device makers are uncertain how to approach clinical outcome measures for BCIs and related software, and these can be discussed for a specific study in a Q submission. However, we know this field is evolving, and we encourage device makers, researchers, and the patient community to work together to establish and validate reliable outcome measures and to openly discuss paths forward as a community. The FDA has several mechanisms in place to interact with stakeholders on these issues, which we'll discuss later. Informational meetings are a 1-hour presentation to reviewers at the FDA. For a company or a researcher, particularly those who don't have much prior FDA experience, it's a great opportunity to meet some of the reviewers who may be working on future submissions and gain some insight into the types of and expertise that we have and the questions that we might ask in a submission. This could be at any stage, so it might include a presentation of proposed protocols or final study data and conclusions. This is intended to inform FDA, not to start a discussion or get formal responses to questions. One point worth making here is that no matter what the submission, we take confidentiality very seriously. If someone has questions related to various aspects of planned testing or clinical protocols, we want them to submit a pre-submission. It's an opportunity to ask us questions prior to a formal submission such as an IDE. We can reduce regulatory risk by providing useful feedback on a device or propose testing protocols and increase the chances that a future submission will be successful. I want to point out that pre-submissions are intended to allow us to answer questions about approach and are not a mechanism for pre-review of data collected prior to another submission. We have a goal of getting written answers sent by day 70 and scheduling a meeting if requested, no later than day 75, although this can be impacted by the availability of our subject matter experts at the FDA. Pre-submissions are most effective when they include specific questions rather than broad questions. We acknowledge that much of the technology in the neural space is novel and changing, and that more traditional outcome measures may need to be updated. We aren't going to propose outcome measures, but we welcome your discussion as a community and discussion through pre-submissions. There's been quite a bit of information out there lately about devices with breakthrough designations, and this may be of interest to those of you working to develop novel technologies. Device developers can request breakthrough designation for their device and, if granted, make use of expedited interactions to gain feedback from FDA as resources allow. This is for devices that provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human disease or conditions, and that represent breakthrough technologies for which no approved or cleared alternatives exist, or that offer significant advantages over existing approved or cleared alternatives. Note that we do require some clinical data to support a determination that the device will be effective. We have granted breakthroughs for devices that aren't finalized, but we do need sufficient evidence that the approach is feasible and that there is a reasonable expectation that the approach will be technically and clinically successful. Eventually, a device will need to be tested clinically, and trials for significant risk devices will require FDA oversight through an IDE. CDRH breaks clinical trials down into three main categories shown here. The first are early feasibility studies, or EFSs, which are small trials often used for first-in-human studies. EFSs are usually performed before the device design has reached its final form, and thus the intent of these studies is to guide device modifications and understand device use, perhaps along with other treatments or therapies. The second category are traditional feasibility studies. These, on the other hand, capture preliminary safety and effectiveness information on near final or final device designs to adequately plan for the pivotal study. The last category, the pivotal study, is the proper method to collect definitive evidence of safety and effectiveness for a specified intended use. Now, we've been talking about devices that require clinical studies with FDA oversight, but some devices are not invasive and may even be limited to just software functions. In 2020, building up from a great deal of work on SAMDs and digital health technologies, the FDA launched CDRH's Digital Health Center of Excellence, or DHCOE. This launch was driven by our ongoing commitment to advancing access to digital health technology collaboratively, including artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, ML software. The goal of the DHCOE is to empower stakeholders to advance healthcare by fostering responsible and high-quality digital health innovation. The DHCOE seeks to find ways to tailor our regulatory approaches that is fit for purpose to these emerging technologies, including AI and ML, that have huge potential to positively impact public health. This is a shared goal for all involved in this space, and the FDA is a partner and contributor in the overall ecosystem, fostering responsible innovation to meet our standards of safety and effectiveness. Now, there are three components to this goal. One is connecting the work that's being done both inside the FDA and outside the FDA to other parts of the ecosystem. Another is bringing that knowledge together, creating a network that people can stand upon so there's less duplication, and we can drive synergy. And third, we want to innovate how the FDA approaches this technology while maintaining that standard of safety and effectiveness. The DHCOE fosters several initiatives through which you could interact with the FDA specific to digital health technologies. First, academic institutions can collaborate with FDA through the FDA's Center of Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation. Second, you can establish collaborative communities to work together to discuss and develop solutions to challenges that are unique to your device landscape. Third, we have public-private partnerships that promote the development of new tools. Fourth, we have the FDA network of digital health experts who work with FDA staff to provide expertise on digital health issues. And lastly, you can submit to the digital health inbox for informal feedback and help navigating the FDA. Now, I'd like to emphasize two of the options shown here: collaborative communities and public-private partnerships. The FDA does not lead or convene collaborative communities, nor do they exist to advise the FDA. However, FDA may participate as a member of a collaborative community and will consider adopting the solutions developed by the community if doing so is in the best interest of public health and is consistent with the law. I'd like to emphasize at this point that we don't have any collaborative communities in place for BCIs. Stakeholders in the BCI device world are in a particularly unique position to benefit from collaborative communities right now. For example, within a collaborative community, you could work together to develop consensus outcome measures and output signals for BCIs, knowing that such continuity would make it easier for future end effectors to support that they work across various device designs and platforms. Collaborative communities are convened by interested stakeholders and appear organically rather than at the direction or request of the FDA. They may exist indefinitely, produce deliverables as needed, and tackle challenges with broad impact. This mutually beneficial relationship is reinforced by shared responsibility and accountability for achieving results towards common goals. We encourage medical device stakeholders to consider forming collaborative communities and to consider requesting CDRH's participation in appropriate cases. I've included on this slide a link to materials that can be used to start a collaborative community, but you can also reach out to us at any time to discuss what's involved.
Hello, this is Christopher. We've had a request from one of the participants is in order to see the ASL, if you could turn your video off unless you're speaking, that would be helpful. And Julia, this is Christopher. Are you done?
Oh no, sorry. I was just waiting to allow that to happen.
We have a few more minutes with questions, so if you could slowly kind of wrap it up, that'd be great. This is excellent information.
Sure.
Thank you.
Recently, the FDA established a new avenue for public-private partnerships through the medical device development tool, the MDDT program. If you develop common tools or technology together, you may be able to work with the FDA on your tool through the MDDT program. If FDA determines that a proposed device development tool, such as a clinical outcome measure for a certain device type, might be useful in evaluation of all such devices, we can work with you to help to validate that tool. Now, this is exciting because it can be a pathway to ultimately reducing the regulatory burden and uncertainty of the review process. We've seen a wide range of applications for MDDTs, so if you have something in mind, come talk to us. We recommend that you think carefully as a community about what tools might be most useful for your needs and discuss your thoughts in a pre-submission before submitting an application for an MDDT. We want to hear perspectives from industry and academic stakeholders, but we're also very interested in hearing from healthcare providers and patients. We hold regular patient listening sessions, which allow patients to give FDA staff insight into their experiences and interests. And we encourage patients to make their voices heard so that we can better serve their needs. Now, as we start to wrap up, I'm going to move quickly through an array of resources that we wanted to provide you in these slides. that are being made public in this meeting. Last year, we had a webinar introducing our new brain-computer interface device guidance, and we've included links for both the webinar and the associated guidance here. And we have a webpage for resources specifically aimed at those developing neuro-related devices that includes many of the links I'm sharing here and additional information. And we've also linked some of our past papers, including an overview of the regulation of neurological devices. And here we've included links to sites where you can learn about what's going on at CDRH. There are a couple of FDA web pages listed here that include links to multiple resources associated with device development and a link to our MDDT program mentioned earlier. Now, in summary, we care about patient safety and getting effective devices to the patients who need them, and we welcome interactions with you. If you're developing a device, we recommend you speak with us early and often, and we encourage you to work together. We've listed our contact information here, so feel free to reach out to us with questions, and we'll help you whenever possible. Thanks again for inviting us, and we'd like to open the floor to questions.
Great. Thank you, Julia. This is Christopher. Jennifer, we have just a little bit of time for questions. We're a little bit behind. I don't know if you've seen the questions in the chat there, but
Yeah.
maybe just a couple minutes, 3 or 4.
Yeah, that sounds good. And, I think that the first question in the chat is actually a great one to start with. And I think it's for Heather. So the question is, could you maybe give some examples of what makes a medical device versus a wellness device? Thinking of BCIs, you could imagine a non-invasive device that allows for computer access, which is maybe not a medical device if it's used for somebody just to play a video game, but maybe for somebody who needs it because of a mobility or communication impairment, it would cross into that medical device.
That's actually a more complicated question than it might seem. So, that would also require, unless it's using something like EEG, it's probably going to require implantation of say, an electrode array or some other type of technology that accesses the brain. And that's changing the structure and function of the human body. So we would consider that a medical device. When we talk about wellness devices, we're generally talking about the app on your smartphone that helps you track your sleep or your nutrition or your exercise. These are helping you to be well, become stronger, more focused through more sleep, just as part of a healthy lifestyle. It was not created, with the BCI type of device in mind. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. The other area of focus, I think, Julia, that you brought up is, ways for both the researchers and potential end users to engage with FDA. And you touched on collaborative communities and patient listening sessions. Could you speak a little bit about how end user and stakeholder feedback might be integrated during different stages of regulation and different risk categories?
So we think it's critical that manufacturers and researchers incorporate end user perspectives into device development. And this can be done in many ways, including patient surveys, interviews, and human factors research. However, the FDA also wants to hear from end users, which is why, as discussed in our presentations, we do have patient listening sessions where end users can provide us with insights into their experiences and perspectives. And FDA reviewers and management are eager to hear your insights, especially with respect to BCIs. Now, we mentioned collaborative communities in our presentation, which represent a wonderful opportunity for all of you to work together with individuals with disabilities, caregivers, and clinicians to develop these outcome measures and identify critical functions, discuss the amount of risk that users feel comfortable taking on. And the FDA can participate in these if invited and may adopt the products of these discussions as appropriate and legally permissible, which offers an avenue for you to provide input very early in the phase before we've actually developed regulation theoretically. We also have post-market monitoring for adverse events for devices. So if you're using a device that's already on the market and you have a problem with it, we do have an avenue for you to provide feedback and let us know that there's a problem or a safety risk with that device, which we monitor continuously.
Great. And I know that a focus of this presentation was related to software. And if you're thinking about BCIs, that's really one component of the device. Could you speak to how FDA regulates software at different stages of device development as well?
So we see software and devices typically as part of the greater device landscape, especially with BCIs. We're looking at software that is part of a greater system. So we generally don't look at software to the exclusion of the device. We see the device as a whole. So risk for software also includes risks for the device. So when you're assessing risk for a software device, you'd be assessing how the risks of the software device also interact with the device as a whole and its risks. And when we're looking at device development throughout the different stages of clinical trials, we'll consider the risk of the device, but also the stage of the clinical trial. So if your device is being used in an early feasibility study, the amount of information that FDA needs to know about that software is different than the amount of information required for, say, a pivotal study or a marketing submission. And the amount of information is going to be relative to the risk of the device itself. So that can change depending on the software and its intended use and the intended use of the device and the risks that it may present to the patient.
Great. And I know we're not going to have time to get to all of these questions, so maybe I'll just end, with this one from Roman here, who's asking, how does the FDA consider the need to be able to make this technology reimbursable through Medicaid, for example? Are there ways to engage them in the process and the selection of outcome measures, for example?
And Heather, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we don't really have any say in reimbursement processes. That's outside the purview of the FDA, correct, Heather?
Correct. I believe there are mechanisms to engage with FDA and CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, when you're planning your clinical protocol. I'd have to look into that mechanism and to give you more information about that. But we do want device developers to think about this early so that they can collect their clinical data in a way that will satisfy the regulatory requirements of FDA and the expectations of CMS. So please do think about that early and talk to us about ways that we can work with CMS to best help you develop your clinical study. And it may be that something like a collaborative community would allow people from CMS to be involved as well in looking at what would best allow you to test these devices. Might have to look into that. I'm not entirely sure about the CMS involvement.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Steen and Slocum, for joining us today, and appreciate all the questions from the audience. We'll try to type back some answers if we can in the meantime. But again, thanks so much.
Thank you all. This is Christopher. Excellent discussion. I mean, it could go on and on. The questions are excellent. So the responses, may have to have you back. Anyway, so we have a poll next before we move on to our next panel. And I'm gonna have Mal bring up the poll question, and we'll give a minute or two for responses. If you need more, let us know. Mal?
Today's poll question is, do you think that the current evolution of regulatory and review processes is on the right track to help the neurotech and BCI innovators that improve their access to markets? Choice 1, yes. Choice 2, no. Choice 3, I don't know.
Now coming in, this is Christopher. Almost like we need some music, right? Going on. So yes, it's looking good. Okay. So for yes, we're at 47%. Oh, wow. I don't know is at 47%. And then no at 6%. So no, I don't know is 50%. Let's give it another second. Oh, it's changing. All right. There we go. 100% answered. Yes is at 44%. no is at 6%, and I don't know wins at 50%. So 44, 6%, and 50%. Thank you, Mal, for that. Appreciate it. All right. So I want to bring on our next panel. And okay. All right. Anthony, how are you doing?
Good, thank you, sir.
Good, good. Okay, let me introduce Anthony Ruck to you. He's the CEO of Adventido. He's been part of the AT industry forever, since 1999, which is a long time, right? He's worked with manufacturers, publishers, standard organizations, and service providers to deliver first-class products and customer experiences. I've actually known him a little bit through his work with the Assistive Technology Exposition and Conference, which he has led over the years. So Anthony, welcome. Please introduce your panel, and we're looking forward to this.
Thank you, Christopher, for that kind introduction. You'd never guessed that I wrote it. Just to mention as well, Lucy popped in whilst the panel was going on then and said say hello back. So a pleasure to make your acquaintance. It's my pleasure today to host this panel. And thank you to all the team at G3ICT for inviting us along here to contribute. I'm just going to introduce our three panelists for the session, which is going to be Anna Wexler, Ramses Alcade, and Andreas Forsland. So first of all, Anna, thank you for joining us. Lovely to see you on the screen there. Glad I'm not sat here alone. Anna is the Assistant Professor of Medical Ethics and Health Policy, and the Principal Investigator at Wexler Labs, where she studies the ethical, legal, and social issues surrounding emerging technology. Particularly interested in do-it-yourself medicine, which I think is a fascinating topic. Citizen science, direct-to-consumer health products, online patient communities, and neuroscience technology and alternative neurotherapies. She has a wealth of experience, and it's a great pleasure to have you here with us today, Anna. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on to Dr. Ramses Alcade, who is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder at NeuroAble. Dr. Alcade is a neuroscientist, inventor, and the CEO and founder of NeuroAble. As research at the University of Michigan Direct Brain Interface Laboratory, he's worked extensively to develop brain-computer interface technology for people with amputations, severe cerebral palsy, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Previously CEO of Faro LLC, where he managed numerous high-impact health projects, such as rehabilitation technology for stroke patients. So again, incredibly well equipped for our conversations today. Thank you, Ramses, for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's NeuroAble. I know it's a
little... sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Pleasure to be here.
It's the UK pronunciation. We usually get it wrong.
There we go.
Also a pleasure to welcome Andreas Forsland today, and I'm probably going to get this wrong as well now. So Andreas is the founder, CEO, and Chief Product Officer at Cognition. Yeah, we'll go with the first one. Okay. They're an internationally award-winning neuroscience and technology company pioneering the field of assisted reality, developing AI-powered non-invasive BCIs, assistive tech, and useful applications for people, including those neurodiverse abilities. Won several top awards, including the 2021 Red Dot Best of the Best Award, nominated for the 2021 Red Dot Luminary Award, Edison Gold Award. So a fantastic lineup for you guys today, and I hope you'll agree that a wonderful breadth and depth of both skills and experience. So first of all, to all of our delegates today, if you would use the Q&A to pose any questions as we're going through, it's going to be a free-flowing conversation. So please feel free to pop in any questions as we go. I'm just going to launch off just following on from the FDA presentation then, which was very, very useful. Thank you guys for that one. In terms of the position of the FDA, one of their main drivers is to keep users safe from harm. But one of the questions I want to sort of throw out to the panel is what about the commercial safeguards? How do we deliver on promise? Do we overpromise and underdeliver, the danger that was always there with, say, speech to text, or is it the other way around? Over to you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it's something that, you know, as we've been working on in this field for the last 10 years as a company, we've really faced a lot. Like, we have speech to text devices. We actually have a silent speech to text device as well too, that we're working with some ALS communities. But what we found, at least, is that because our approach is much more trying to make neurotech scalable at a consumer level, you know, and that the technology still needs more time to refine, you know, I think it's the responsible approach to be very slow of providing that information, trying to be more conservative to make sure that these expectations aren't overblown, but at the same time making sure that you're connecting with the individuals who would benefit the most from this type of technology. And I think that there has been a lot of hype, you know, particularly due to a multi-billionaire CEO, but you know, that also helps in some areas as well too, which is getting the word out on neurotechnology, et cetera. And so it's like, how do we balance this? And I think numerous times VCs, which are venture capitalists, and also research labs and a lot of other companies have gotten burned in the past and have burned a lot of bridges, which have made sometimes funding more difficult for especially some non-invasive groups as well too. Because of these bridges we've burned in this overhype and overdeliver. And I think as CEOs in this field, we have to, even though the Silicon Valley approach is overhype everything, vision, I think that the right approach is to be conservative, to help them know these are the concrete goals that are adding value to people's lives. And this is what matters more than just trying to say we can do, you know, everything. Even though brain-computer interface have a lot of potential, we're not at that point yet.
Awesome, thank you. Andreas, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Hi, it's Andreas Forsland with Cognition. You know, we've looked at this at length. You know, are you a healthcare product or medical device, or are you a consumer device? And I kind of use the analogy of rivers and oceans, that, you know, oftentimes when you're going into medical device space, you have to really narrowly define what you're doing, because you want to isolate sort of what that risk profile looks like and make sure you kind of go deep on, you know, all the edge cases on that. And as your business progresses sort of towards the ocean, the mouth gets broader and broader. But then if you think about consumer as the ocean, as the metaphor, you're talking about massive populations, right? In order to satisfy the consumers are really, it's kind of like needs and wants, right? So on the medical device side, you're solving needs. On the consumer side, it's more of a want. And so in order to convince a consumer that has kind of a low threshold or a high threshold, I guess, of novelty, in order for them to repetitively use something, you have to meet a lot of criteria for consumer. On the medical device side, you have to be quite specific to say, like, as an indication of use. Like for what we're doing at Cognition, we call the category of what we're working on assisted reality, because we're using augmented reality in conjunction with other sensors and other input modalities together, like EEG. But under this umbrella of what we call assisted reality, that's kind of like where the river meets the ocean, in the sense that we're talking about practical applications that can be used, such as augmentative communication, AAC technology, for individuals who have trouble communicating or being understood verbally. Environmental control applications, so integrating Alexa inside of our system so that you could have a very low friction way to access smart home controls and other things using EEG or other modalities. And so we're thinking about this world of narrow, sort of with regards to what we're doing, narrowing the scope to those things that have a very high need for sort of medium-sized populations. And that's where it becomes attractive, because then you're not dealing with like orphan drug or orphan populations or very small populations. You're dealing with medium to large size transitional populations. That helps us build a business case for this concept of assisted reality. Now, Cognition is pursuing FDA approval for our devices, because what we realize is that those individuals with the kinds of disabilities that we're supporting often have, say, a stroke or CP or ALS or other kinds of conditions. There's a pretty steep cost of living. The cost of living goes way up when you think about the out-of-pocket expenses required to maintain a certain quality of life or to enhance it. And so often we have to sort of figure out, well, who pays for these systems, right? And that's where the previous conversation around, what portion is borne by the patient or the patient's family or that family's community. So we're working with a community in New York who is a large Hasidic Jewish community. And there's a lot of community involvement in that community regarding individuals with ALS and other things. You have GoFundMes, you have all kinds of other things that people will do to help sort of fund or fill in the gap on that out of pocket. But usually it is quite expensive, right, to build for small populations. Where consumer, you can carry that scale, you can reduce your costs considerably if your marketing can address like scale. So there is kind of this hybrid where our company is focused more on the rivers today, moving towards kind of the ocean, that there are future opportunities for our technology that can be generalized for consumer applications in augmented reality and virtual reality. But for now, we're focused strictly on really trying to create a best-in-class, world-class experience for communication augmentation and environmental control. Awesome. But you're also seeing the inverse, where you have consumer companies like Apple and all the other companies that are kind of coming in with sensors such as pulse oximetry and all kinds of other things, right, that are moving into this sort of blurry area, this sort of brackish area, where all of a sudden you're buying this watch because it's cool, it keeps time, it has apps, but now you can monitor your heart rate, you can deal with tremors. And so you're starting to see more consumer indications of use kind of going both ways. Like, the water's moving up the river and it's also coming down the river. So it's kind of an exciting time to be looking at all of it.
It is. Anna, I'm just going to jump on a quick question with you, if I may. Do you feel that that society in general has a fair understanding and interpretation of where BCI is at the moment?
So that's a good question. And so I think in answering that, I also want to respond to your first question, which is what are the commercial safeguards, right, that are in place? And so we heard that great presentation from the FDA, right, which is about the types of products that FDA regulates, right? There's also the types of products that FDA doesn't regulate, right? And so for those type of products, I think it's common, I don't know, I want to say misconception, but people often refer to those products as unregulated, which I think what they mean to say is they're unregulated by the FDA, but there's actually other regulations and other agencies, at least in the US, that can regulate those products. So for example, the Federal Trade Commission can take action for unfair or misleading business practices. In reality, a lot of the work that agency does is related to unsubstantiated claims and misleading advertising claims. And so they haven't taken action, to my knowledge, for any case related to BCI. But they have taken action for, I think Lumosity was maybe the most relevant here, and supplements that claim to enhance brain capabilities or brain wellness. FTC has taken action in that space. We have the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which again hasn't done, to my knowledge, hasn't taken action with regard to neurotech or neuro-related devices, but they regulate the safety of devices such as like Peloton, the treadmill. There was that big recall, a big back and forth between Peloton and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Fisher-Price Rock and Play here in the US. So they recall products that may be unsafe, right? So and then you have state laws that can also come into play. So there are regulations, right, for products that exist outside the space of the FDA. I do want to also point out, though, that there's a difference between whether a product, again, technically can be regulated by an agency or whether the agency has taken, right? The agency has enforced that regulation. So what we have not seen in the space is any enforcement, really, of regulation or for direct-to-consumer wellness devices. And as we've been touching upon, there's a sort of blurriness between this wellness and this medical space here. And so it'll be interesting to see. Some of these devices are really getting like right in between the two. So that's what I want to say about commercial safeguards. And I actually forgot your initial question, which was it about society on?
Yeah, I think it's in terms of society, I've learned a lot from my research for this panel, an awful lot more than I realized is already out there. It's expanded my knowledge of the applications for BCI and the technology that's now available and how that's moving forward. Do you think society in general actually believes this is a real world application, or is it still science fiction?
Yeah, so now I remember the connection I wanted to make with my original point, which was misleading claims, right? So how does a company market its product, right? And this touches back on what Ramsey was saying, right? This overhyping, right? And so we've done some work looking at, in my lab, looking at some of the claims that direct-to-consumer neurotech companies make and whether they can actually substantiate those, whether there's science to substantiate those claims. So, we haven't studied people and what people understand, but based on the claims that the companies are making, or that many companies, I should say, have made, I think they're overblown. I think a lot of them lack evidence to substantiate what they're claiming that certain devices can do. So I do think that there's an issue right now of a pretty significant issue, right, of misleading claims and consumers not knowing what to believe, or maybe purchasing a product, spending money out of pocket, and then not getting what they paid for, essentially.
No,
well, and also I want to add to that, Anna, if I could, because one of the things we've done is we've created a user advisory council of about 150 individuals in the specific disabled addressable populations that we're serving. And it's absolutely true. It's kind of like each person, accessibility requires it's really personalization. And when you're thinking about making a claim, in the realm of you can make technical claims. So you can put it on a bench test and say, I know how fast I can send a bit through this circuit board. But as soon as you put it into the hands of the person, promising, I'm going to make a bicycle and you can ride it, you can pop wheelies and go on a half pipe. That's very different than just saying, here's a bicycle, right? And so that's the challenge is, in our world, we talk about communication augmentation or enabling somebody to communicate using BCI. Well, for some people, simply being able to say yes or no is exponential, right? Because you're so locked in, you can't speak. And so being able to say, hey, you can say yes or no and access that with a BCI is a pretty low promise, but it's extremely valuable to that family or to that population. I think it's when we get up into the realm of gee, now you can do 90 to 140 words per minute typing with your BCI. That's where it becomes super suspicious, right? Because we're all in this field. And it's how many people can do that, right? That's kind of X Games level. Whoever is able to do that is an amazing individual, but it doesn't represent what others can get. So I think there is kind of this, validation part that's really required. That's more than in one, right? That we have to look at.
Quick sort of development on your point there, Andres. In terms of the interpretation of the signals, in terms of sort of control of robotic arms, etc. A lot of this requires artificial intelligence and the progress of artificial intelligence to, we communicate a simple instruction, but the artificial intelligence then takes that further and sort of does the required sort of heavy lifting to take that further. How reliant is the progress of BCI on the development of artificial intelligence?
I think that is a big topic, probably deserving its own conference. I think Ramsey could talk about it in their way at NeuroAbilities, and we could probably talk about it in ours. I'd say when we talk about AI, we sort of break it down into machine learning. And so I think we're a long ways off from some general AI that's going to replace someone. So when we talk about machine learning, we're applying machine learning in the BCI itself. So how can the machine learning learn just enough about the user so that it can adapt the system to increase speed and accuracy, period. On the application side, then it kind of depends on the application. So we're using machine learning in a language system to allow the language system and the corpora to the corpus of the user to adapt to the user. So this idea of, the system learns as you use it, and it incentivizes you to use it more so that you're training the machine as the machine is learning from you. And so that closed loop system is super important. Otherwise, it kind of doesn't matter what you're doing with AI if it's not learning and it's not closing that loop.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Ramsey.
I definitely agree with that approach. We kind of see it as like three levels. We call it AI, AII, right? You have the AI that's on the user interface, that's on the how do you make it smoother? How do you gather information on an individual's intent that doesn't necessarily need just brain data, but like how do people, when they're typing a sentence or when they're trying to, think of a word, what is the highest probability based off of what we have, right? Then you have the actual AI on the brain side, and that's really where a lot of our IP comes in from the University of Michigan, and that's what I would say is like our biggest area where we've worked with a lot of groups. And then the third one is human plasticity. The brain also, the more that you use it, sometimes the easier it gets, right? So it's not just about helping the technology trying to fit the individual, but the individual learns to fit the technology as well too. And it becomes so natural because our brain is designed in that way where any input or output that we create, it just naturally starts to interface with it more naturally, right? And so one of the big things is how do you allow for that type of feedback to happen so that humans can more naturally interact with their technology and it feels like a second nature to them instead of like a software update messing everything up.
And also on that, just that plasticity piece, we call it wetware. It's the wetware that you're kind of trying to engineer to understand what's going on. But this kind of goes back to the earlier point I made just about consumer versus medical device, right? Is that consumers expect sort of that what Amazon has done to make like Amazon Prime, and you order something, it arrives almost the next day, and you open the box and you put it on and you think it's going to work like just like that. Like that's the consumer expectation.
Yep.
Right. Medical device, there's a sense of understanding that, oh, there's a bit of a setup, there's a learning curve. Often there actually is a clinical assessment. Often there is a support system in place, even if it's periodic supports that's there. So there's a bit of guardrails that helps ensure success in the medical device space just by nature of what it is. So it's extremely challenging to design systems that can generalize very, very quickly in consumer, just given those dynamics.
For sure. I just want to one quick aside on that, which is like that's always been kind of like the biggest challenge. We started with these large laboratory systems, and we would bring them to individuals who had ALS and cerebral palsy. And while for them being able to say yes or no from that perspective, or being able to even understand their own cognitive changes that are happening over time might be something that they were willing to use, right? And so our goal has been, how do we get BCI technology to an everyday level, and that's where our current technology stands, which is like it's a pair of headphones, right? So it's something that you would wear while you work. It can be integrated into glasses or earbuds, but it's how do you get to that consumer level kind of perspective. And the way we've thought about it is similar to touchscreens. They were previously used as AAC devices. I used to work with them a ton with different individuals. And then, Apple came out with the iPhone and just completely revolutionized how we use touchscreens. And a lot of my friends who use AAC devices now just download software for communication on their iPads, right? And so that's kind of how we see some of the work that we're doing, which is how do you bring even very basic BCI functionality to the point where it feels like you're using an Apple product. It's very limited what it can do, but at least you don't have to go through the setup. You can do very simple things with it. But it feels like you're buying something off the shelf instead of necessarily having to have a professional help you with setup. Obviously, if you have ALS, you would need a professional just because of motoric impairments. But once you get the system on you, how do we make it seamless, right? And that's where a lot of these AIs come in, which is the AI helps when human error comes in, right? So we have multiple sensors on the device. If somebody puts it on differently every time, there's an AI to detect which ones work, which sensors are working well now versus where they were previously, how to adapt the system for the individual instead of necessarily having to fidget around with it. And there's a lot of these kind of like, tiny life things. It's like, for example, when you use your phone and you scroll with it, how it bounces at the bottom, right? Or how the more you flick it, the faster it'll go and accelerates. It's these like user interface moments that make it whether the device you're using feels natural or not. And there's a whole set of AI and development that goes in with that as well too.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Anna, anything you'd like to chip in on that one before I scare you with the next question?
I'll just say that, I've been studying this market for a while, and I think, sort of what Ramsey was going upon, thinking there's been at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half of, direct to consumer neurotech products that have been marketed to consumers. And I think there's the form factor is one thing that I think many companies haven't considered or completely considered in their marketing. And so, Ramsey, it's good to hear that you're thinking about headphones, right? Because there's another device that provides brain stimulation called Halo that's gone with headphones. But people don't want to wear funny things on their heads, right? It's hard enough to get people to wear helmets when they're riding a bike. And so, this is something I haven't heard talked about that much in all the enthusiasm about consumer neurotech, but like getting people to have something on their head during the day and want to wear it in public, I think is a really challenging point. And again, back to this value, right? What value is it going to add to consumers? And so if you think about that personally, just as just the general public, what's going to get them to wear something on their head during the day, right? And I think that's a question that I haven't heard. There's so much enthusiasm about consumer neurotech and Silicon Valley optimism, all this stuff. And there's just basic questions like these that I just don't hear being considered. And I'm not speaking to the CEOs here today, but just throwing out as a general.
Anna, you have just walked straight into my next question, which is the most brilliant introduction. Thank you. And that is, what are the concerns or the barriers to adoption of this? Is it around self-determination? Do we still know we're making our own choices? Is it about brain hacking? Is it about the embarrassment of, I know people who won't wear glasses. There's some crazy things out there. What do you see as being sort of the things that really are going to need to be addressed and overcome for society to say, yeah, this is good, this is a good thing?
So we did a survey with over 1,000 people, and we even created fake websites where we had different products, some that looked like VR systems, some that had headphones, some that had earbuds, some that had spikes, some that did not, right? And we just did a whole bunch of data gathering to understand, like, what would people buy, right? That's the ultimate question that we've been trying to answer at NeuroAbilities. And what we found out is that consumers, and even some people who had ALS or other motoric impairments, they didn't want spikes, right? Like, as soon as something had a spike, because you need spikes to go through hair, they were just like, nope, I don't want that device, right? Individuals, most consumers didn't want something that was a forehead band, right? They didn't want a giant net cap system. Obviously, that looks weird, right? When it came to individuals, really what they accepted was something that already existed, which is headphones and earbuds, right? Or in the rims of glasses. And so the challenge is, how do you create a brain-computer interface that does not use spikes, right? And can be integrated into these devices and look natural, right? You can imagine, and this, now we're talking much farther forward, but imagine somebody with ALS trying to do a yes or no communication system, but it's just a small earbud that they put in one ear, right? So that they can still listen to other people on the other ear, right? These are the kinds of devices that could scale with individuals. And so that was kind of the biggest challenge that was brought forward to us. And to be honest, like, I didn't think we were going to be able to do it, because it's like a crazy idea, but a lot of different technology has evolved recently. Dry sensors have gotten much better. The machine learning pipeline that we've been working with for the past 10 years has gotten much better. It's been 4,000 individuals worth of data to improve the technology to get it down to work into headphones and earbuds. But, also batteries have gotten smaller. Machine learning neuromorphic chips now fit inside everyday devices. And so it really is the coming together of all these systems that exist right now that have enabled this kind of future, and there's still a long way to go. There's only simple interactions, but like, what adds value? For some people, it's a yes or no response. For a much bigger scale, like, for example, right now we're focused on productivity workers. It's biofeedback about their focus over time, right? And then, but long term, those are biomarkers for many other things. For example, ADHD. They can be used for, there's a study we're doing right now with a group in Colombia that's looking at Alzheimer's, and how there's actual neuromarkers in EEG for that. So what if you're just wearing a EEG system, a brain computer interface system every single day because you listen to music while you work, or you use it as your main communication device and it's not something weird? Now we can start tracking those biomarkers over long periods of time. Now, will that be successful? I don't know. There's still a lot more work to be done there.
We are, sorry, Ramsey, I hate to interrupt, but
valuable.
I hate to interrupt. We're at the bottom of the hour.
Oh, sorry about that.
To close it. No worries. I can tell your passion as well as everyone else's. There was so much to unpack there. Your analogy of AAC, and just think about the cost has come down for AAC devices, $6,000, $8,000. Now it's like you have an app, right? So, and then the whole conversation around the misleading claims we could go on and on about that. So Anthony and panel, I wish I had more time so you could wrap it up, but I don't have any time.
Me too.
Anna, Andreas, thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And we're going to close it
Thank
out.
you,
Thank you very much, Ramsey. Thank you, Andres, Anna, Anthony. And so we're going to close it out. We're going to put the final slide up. This is the second day of 3 days, as you will recall from the very beginning. We've got a great presentation for you tomorrow also. So much information. Disability rights and neuroethics is our theme. And before we jump off, I just want to thank the participants, the speakers. They were amazing. Bring them in. We definitely want to thank our partners, as well as the accessibility team, Valerie, Beth, and Kelly. You were awesome. And the G3ICT team and the IAAP team. Thank you so much. And we will see you tomorrow.